Fortran et je suis le directeur national de la Ligue des droits de la personne de B'nai B'rith Canada. Permettez-moi de souhaiter la bienvenue à tout le monde ici ce soir pour cet appel qui discutera d'une réponse communautaire à la récente législation québécoise. Tonight's meeting will be in French and in English. Speakers can speak in the language of their choice. There won't be any translation. Allow me to explain the context of tonight's meeting. On June 13, B'nai B'rith, Canada's oldest Jewish advocacy organization, nationally active since 1875, held a press conference to explain our opposition to Bill 96, reasons largely specific to the Jewish community. Much of what was said at that press conference will be brought up again tonight by our CEO, Michael Mostyn, and by Speaker Greg Borden. We received national coverage and many calls from groups representing different religious and ethnic minorities. They told us their hesitations about the law, repeating many of our arguments and urging us to convene a community forum to build a response. That is what we are doing this evening. This meeting is by invitation. Those present represent groups and individuals that have interfaced with B'nai B'rith or otherwise expressed their interest to us. Nous commencerons la soirée par une brève introduction de M. Mostyn, qui est au siège social de B'nai B'rith à Toronto. Puis, nous entendrons deux avocats bien connus, Julius Gray et Pearl Eliadis, qui expliqueront le contexte de la loi et ce qu'il dit et signifie. Nous suivrons avec Joe Ortona, président de la Commission scolaire English Montréal, qui fournira une mise à jour sur la poursuite de la Commission scolaire contre le gouvernement concernant les projets de loi 96 et 40. We'll then hear from M&A David Bernbaum, the Honorable Marlene Jennings, Pho Nemi, the Executive Director of CRAR, and leaders of the Black, Filipino, and South Asian communities. We'll also hear from Daniel Fox, a student at McGill University, who has worked with fellow students in medicine and healthcare to alert the public that Bill 96 appears to conflict with the code of ethics that govern the professions they seek to work in. I want to thank all of our speakers for making themselves available this evening. Please note that Ilit Arhanson from our legal department of B'nai B'rith is present tonight to take notes as we move towards a decision as to the best course of action. Many of you are aware that Maitre Gray has been widely quoted in the media indicating that Bill 96 is, in his words, the most gratuitous use of power I've ever seen. Maitre Gray said, explaining that he will be among a group of lawyers who will challenge Bill 96 in courts in Canada and address international tribunals such as the United Nations Human Rights Committee. Many of you also read Maitre Eliadis' piece on the overreach of Bill 96, where she cogently argues the law goes far beyond what is necessary or appropriate to protect the French language. She termed the law a sustained assault on equality rights, fundamental freedoms, and human rights. La point de vue de ces deux avocats bien connus attire beaucoup d'attention. Un nombre des Québécois francophones et anglophones concluent la même chose. Il y a un désir public de contester la loi sur son utilisation sans précédent de la clause non-obstant, sur les pouvoirs de péréquation et de saisie sans mandat qu'elle donne aux inspecteurs linguistiques, à la conclusion que beaucoup d'anglophones ne seront pas classés comme tels par la loi et perdre accès aux services en anglais. Let us begin our evening. Speakers, please respect our agreed upon time limit. I've given Mr. Ortona an extra minute, given that he will provide an update on Bill 40 as well as on Bill 96. B'nai B'rith is prepared to seek clarifications for the government of Quebec as to its willingness to scale back provisions of Bill 96, and we are equally prepared to examine a possible suit on grounds that are different than used by parties that have already contested. Before I give the floor to Mr. Mostyn, I want to note the following may be on the call already, but have indicated they will be on this call, and that includes Alex Batauchi, the mayor of Dollard des Ormeaux, Madame Chelsea Craig, representing MP Anthony Housefather, city councilors from Montreal, Sonny Morose, Mary Darros, and Stephanie Valenzuela, English Montreal school commissioners, Ellie Israel, Joe Lala, and of course, Joe Ortona, MP David, M&A David Bernbaum, and as well emanate Franz Benjamin. If I have forgotten other of the elected officials, I will recognize you when I go through the list after our first speaker has spoken. I now invite Michael Mostyn, the Chief Executive Officer of B'nai B'rith, to take the floor. Mr. Mostyn.
Thank you very much, Marvin, and thank you for once again chairing such an incredible evening. Thank you to everyone in the esteemed group who have joined us here tonight. Just very briefly, for those of you, because I know many of us were on the last call, but I see some new faces. So B'nai B'rith, as Marvin mentioned, has been around since 1875 here in Canada. And through the League for Human Rights, the league which Marvin drives as its director, it really has become the premier Jewish human rights and civil liberties organization in this country. It produces on an annual basis the audit of anti-Semitic incidents. We have volunteers and staff across the country that work not just against anti-Semitism, but against all forms of hate in this country. And it really is important on opportunities like these that we all come together, stand united against hate, because none of us can ever stand for any groups, any identifiable groups in Quebec or in Canada to be targeted. And we all need to stand together. As Marvin had mentioned, B'nai B'rith did hold a press conference in June about Bill 96 to state our opposition to the bill. Today, there are approximately 90,000 Jews that remain in the province of Quebec. Jews have, of course, been in Quebec for centuries. The first congregation was established in 1768 in Quebec. But the laws that have been adopted by the Quebec National Assembly are definitely sending a negative message to our community, as well as to many other communities, as I'm sure many will agree and speak to later on this evening. But Montreal, don't forget, not so long ago was the most populous Jewish community in Canada, with a peak Jewish population of 125,000 back in the early 1970s. But with earlier Bill 21 and now with Bill 96, we have some very, very serious concerns, and we've been hearing from the community regularly about their frustrations with the bills and with the impact that we expect to see, the negative impact against the Jewish community and against all multicultural communities in Quebec. There have been many Bill 96 complaints that have been raised in terms of exemptions for health and social services by some, limiting of communications with government officials from English, restrictions of the use of English before the courts, and of course the powers of inspectors that are not consistent with a democratic society and permitting search and seizures without warrant, without court oversight, that are very, very troubling, again, in a free and democratic society. But some of the other issues that B'nai B'rith raised together with Jewish partner agencies and individuals at the press conference, we were talking about the plight of immigrants. Many immigrants, of course, have a language other than French or English, which is their primary language, and oftentimes English is a secondary language. And for those individuals to be prevented from accessing services in English or in their native tongue by physicians and healthcare providers is really a recipe for disaster. It's something that is not acceptable. We have to put the health and safety of all Canadians first, and any even one negative healthcare outcome would be tragic and unacceptable, and we don't want to wait around for that to happen. It ignores the modern reality of Quebec and the reality of immigrants that chose to make Quebec their home. So thank you once again, everybody, for joining us here today. Marvin, I'd like to thank you once again for coordinating such an esteemed and prestigious group, having so many people spend their evening with us here tonight. It just shows how important these issues are. I myself look forward to hearing from everyone, all of the speakers, and look forward from a B'nai B'rith perspective to working with all of you to make Quebec a better place.
Thank you, Michael. I have to tell you how difficult it is in the midst of the summer to get people to come on a call. Yet we have, at this point, almost 140 people on the call. And I've already received emails and texts for others who are going to join us shortly. So clearly there's interest. Unfortunately, we're competing with the middle of the summer vacation as well. But I can guarantee you that people want to remain in contact, want to dialogue, and want to work together on this. I would like to recognize some other elected officials who I did not mention the first time. I welcome Errol Johnson and Anastasia Asimakopoulos, city councilors in the city of Dollar des Ormeaux, who joined Mayor Alex Batauchi for the mayor of Dollar des Ormeaux this evening. And I also want to recognize Dario Bocco, the Eastern Canada Regional Commander of the Knights of Rizal, for joining us this evening. Bon, la prochaine personne va être Maître Julius Gray. L'appel commence avec deux avocats. Comme j'ai dit dans mon intro, ces deux a déjà exprimé des hésitations majeures concernant cette loi. Both Mr. Gray and Ms. Eliadis have been very, very clear in where they think that Bill 96 goes too far. Both have been in the media. Ms. Eliadis had a piece that was published that a lot of people have seen, and Julius Gray was interviewed on several media and has publicly stated that he will lead a contestation of the bill. I'm going to give the floor to Julius Gray to explain what the bill says and what it doesn't say, and where it represents a danger and how we should approach it. Julius?
Merci, Marvin. J'ai déjà dit que j'ai rarement vu une loi aussi gratuite, aussi ridicule, en fait, parce que personne ne gagne, il n'y a pas de gagnant, il n'y a que de perdants. In the 6 minutes given to me, I can only do it in point form because there's so much that's wrong with this law. So I'll do it, enumerate the things. The first one is that it's based on totally wrong premises, two wrong premises. First wrong premise is that French is in danger. There is not a single example in history of a language which had an obligatory and free system of education in that language disappearing. And of course, that's the case in Quebec. In Bill 101, most people have to go to French school. The opposite is frequent in Western Canada, for example, in the late 19th and early 20th century, in Louisiana, in Wales, where it's the other language that had the education system. Of course, the language can disappear, but there is not a single case of a language which had a free and a universal education system disappearing, and using language at home, used at home as proof that the language is waning is entirely incorrect, because obviously when there is immigration, people do not switch languages at home. I continue to speak Polish with my parents, and most people do speak the other language. So it's a complete misunderstanding of the immigration state that Quebec and Canada are. The second wrong premise, equally wrong, it comes from Frédéric Lacroix's book, where he maintains that English institutions have too high a percentage. It's simply not true, because what Frédéric Lacroix forgets is that the so-called English institutions are bilingual, the hospitals and so on. So you can't just take those institutions and say 100% of that is English, and therefore the English have too much. In any case, I think it's ridiculous, the argument that it's too much, but it's a wrong premise, and it's an arithmetically, demonstrably wrong premise. Nevertheless, nobody reacts to it. The second thing that I would say that is absolutely horrible is the effect on the access to justice. You know that access to justice is very difficult in our society. Justice is expensive. Justice is slow. Justice is bureaucratic. The Quebec government hasn't done anything to alleviate access to justice so far. But what they've done is made it harder for those who may have some difficulty in French. The attack on a system which was working well and there was no problem is, again, completely gratuitous and wrong, and it'll only have the effect of disenfranchising people who will find it even more difficult to come before the courts. The next thing about this law is that it's monstrously unjust. First of all, the creating of two groups of Anglos, the old Anglos and the new Anglos, based on accessibility to English school. It's nonsensical. It's this type of thing that democratic countries do not do. You can point out that countries that have done it, but normally they're not democratic. And completely unnecessary. Furthermore, giving people 6 months, immigrants 6 months to learn a language is ridiculous. I was a 9-year-old child, but after 6 months, I was in English school, as all children were in those days. After 6 months, I wasn't fully able to do everything in English, but for my parents, it would have been hopeless. After 6 months, they were only starting to get some. It's a terribly unfair, unjust, anti-immigrant law that has absolutely no basis in fact. Who would ever say that a person can learn French in 6 months? Anybody tried? Maybe I once knew a linguistic genius, Professor Nicholson at McGill, who could pick up a language in a few weeks, but I've never met anybody else who can do that. And it's absolutely ridiculous. The next thing is the massive abuse of civil rights. People will not be able to get access to health and so on, but even worse, the Office de la Langue Française is going to get powers that the police does not have in investigating murders. Obviously, speaking English here is worse than murder, but they can't just walk in and look at your computer. They can't just walk in and look at your documents. But here it appears they'll be able to do it, and they'll be able to do it notwithstanding that we're challenging that in court, notwithstanding the right to legal privilege and medical privilege for people. They'll be able to look at medical files and legal files, which no one can do. There's absolutely no reason why they would depart from the rule that you have to get a warrant and that the bar or the medical corporation would have to be present to do that. But no, it's a total violation of civil rights. And the idea that these inspectors will be able to go around, and by the way, they can also give you an order, and to disobey it is a criminal offense. It's totally inconsistent with civil rights as Canada has known them. It's a bureaucratization and so on. I've often said Quebec is certainly not a police state. It isn't a police state, but it's quickly becoming an inspector state. And in some ways, an inspector state can be just as invasive and just as dangerous. And we've got to do something about the abuse, the misuse of civil rights. A law that basically says people can just walk in and demand things, and people can be, of course, classified differently and so on. As I said, there is no winner. Francophones are just as much affected as Anglophones. It's unfortunate that people don't see it. It's a typical thing you see all over the world where people are reluctant to stand up against something they identify with. But Francophones are also big losers in this, and they're losing the opportunity, for instance, to use their acquired bilingualism. The law seems to want to make the world safe for unilinguals. Finally, there's the constitutional amendment. Constitutional amendment supposedly doesn't change the law, but it does, because the purpose for that constitutional amendment is to say whenever anybody contests anything, but Quebec is different. Quebec is not the same. Never mind whether the Supreme Court of Canada has spoken 10 times on this issue. Quebec is different. We have the right to, we have a different orientation as a society. We are less Locke and more Rousseau. Never mind, Rousseau wouldn't like this either. I think the obvious conclusion of the constitutional amendment is a danger, a threat of cutting us off from the Supreme Court and from the jurisprudence that has protected us. With that, I would say this law is completely indefensible. Thank you.
Thank you, Julius. I'm sorry I couldn't give you more time. I know you're just warming up and that you just gave us a resume. That said, before I go to Pearl, I want to recognize two more counselors who joined us, Morris Vesley, counselor of Dollar Days Ormeau, and Ryan Brownstein, also counselor of Dollar Days Ormeau. I'd like to thank the Dollard Council for its strong support, not only this evening, but its support for initiatives that promote harmony in the community, fight racism. You've been great supporters of B'nai B'rith and the work we have done, and we appreciate that. Sorry, and there's another Dollard counselor, and that is Errol Johnson. I'm not sure I mentioned him beforehand. And I also like to recognize Joan Lee, the president of the West Highland Black community. Thank you very much for coming here this evening. We'll now give it to Pearl, who has a hard stop. It's got to be out of here at 7:30 for another Zoom call. Pearl, would you please take the floor?
Thanks very much, Marvin. It's lovely to see everyone. Est-ce que tout le monde m'entend bien? Parfait, merci beaucoup. Alors, merci beaucoup à B'nai B'rith pour avoir organisé cette soirée très intéressante et je vous félicite tous toutes et tous d'être parmi nous ce soir. Il fait très, très beau à Montréal ce soir, alors c'est vraiment un très grand plaisir de vous voir parmi nous. C'est aussi un grand plaisir de voir tellement d'amis sur cet appel. Bonjour à tout le monde, les gens que je connais, les gens que je ne connais pas, je toutes mes excuses pour être obligée de partir un peu tôt ce soir. Je vais parler principalement en anglais pour les raisons qui sont directement liées à l'enjeu qui nous préoccupe ce soir. So I'm going to try to drill down a little bit on some of what Julia said. It's always both a pleasure and a bit of intimidation to follow Julius in any public speaking. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the points that he mentioned and raise a couple of new ones. I've been raising the alarm about the implications of Bill 96, the broad historical trend that it is part of. This is not a one-off bill, and the fact that it's a violation of international law since the fall of 2021. The piece that Marvin referenced at the beginning that was published on the overreach of Bill 96 has been picked up and reproduced in both national and international contexts. And there's always, I think, a danger of objections to the bill being picked up and translated into sort of Quebec bashing type commentaries, and I think it's extremely important to avoid that kind of characterization, but to nonetheless be fearless and clear about the fact that this bill, Bill 96, along with Bill 21 for that matter, are completely, as Julia said, egregious violations of the most basic principles of civil rights, of constitutional rights protected by both the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and, of course, the Quebec Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which until quite recently was supposedly the cornerstone and the most important legal document in Quebec society, and has since been completely overrun by these types of overrides. So, as you all know, Bill 96 freezes access to CJEPs for people who are not essentially historic Anglophones. That term is not directly used in the bill, but that is what we're told it's going to boil down to. And as Julius mentioned, it considerably strengthens the role of the Office de la langue française. La plupart des Canadiens, y compris les anglophones québécois, comprennent très, très bien que la langue française est précaire dans le cadre de l'Amérique du Nord et que la culture québécoise est unique. Et nous comprenons tous que les mesures appropriées sont nécessaires afin de protéger la langue française. But this is not the way to do it. Bill 96 has been widely condemned because of its preemptive derogations from human rights protections. As I mentioned, both charters have been derogated from. And I agree with Julius that it ignores the modern reality of Quebec. Large numbers of immigrants whose mother tongues are neither French nor English are learning French and living in several languages. And that has been true in my community as well, in the Greek community. It is also a clear violation of international human rights law, a dimension that has been very rarely discussed in the debates in Quebec and beyond. How does Bill 96 go further than is necessary for protecting the French language? Well, we know that Bill 96 is going to bar a few thousand Anglophones from English CJEPs, but that measure is going to have no effect whatsoever on the decline of people whose mother tongue is French in Quebec and who are speaking French at home, which is supposedly the area of most concern. Because of its disproportionate impacts, it violates the principles of fundamental justice that are guaranteed by Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as described by the Canadian Supreme Court of Canada. But of course, the Quebec government has overridden Section 7 by using the notwithstanding clause in Section 33, making access to the Charter challenge with regard to principles of fundamental justice completely inaccessible. I want to say a word about something we haven't talked about lately, or indeed in the context of our discussions today about Indigenous languages. Bill 96 ignores the opportunity to strengthen Indigenous languages. And that is an omission that was notable, given that 2021 was a year that marked Canada's first day for truth and reconciliation. Indigenous languages received short shrift in Bill 96, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the Quebec government has made some encouraging statements about Indigenous languages, but the issue of Bill 96 is still a real one, and the Quebec government has not said that it would abrogate Bill 96 with regard to these constitutional issues. Bill 96 essentially eliminates or severely compromises legal rights for English speakers related to fair trials. It forces parties to draft their pleadings in French or ensure that a certified French translation accompanies pleadings. And the issue of search and seizures, which Julius has already mentioned, particularly in Section 111 of Bill 96, will include inspectors' powers to require people to access virtually any data related to any information pertinent to the enforcement of the Office of Powers. I note that this bill only applies to businesses. However, there is a provision in the bill, which has not been discussed very much publicly, that states that if the inspector believes that the information or data has been taken to another location, that the inspection powers will follow to that other location, and that could conceivably include a home. So these are just a couple of examples of the type of overreach and the potential implications that the bill has. It has significant implications for immigrants, particularly given the current context in Quebec for racialized communities, impacts on religious communities, communities of faith, not only the Jewish community, of course, but also the Muslim community, Eastern Orthodox, and other communities that are directly affected by the bill. So I want to point out as well that the international treaties that Canada has signed make this type of provision that we see in Bill 96 completely illegal. And I am convinced and believe strongly, and it's very rare that lawyers are as unequivocal as I'm about to be, but it is extremely unlikely, in my view, that a petition going up to the Human Rights Committee that oversees the treaty process is extremely unlikely that will go unrecognized. I think there's a very strong chance of success of going to the international community in order to challenge this bill. I'm going to stop there. I'd like to thank everyone for their presence today and for the opportunity to speak. My apologies for having to leave, but Marvin, if there's anybody who has questions or wishes follow up, please do feel free to pass on my coordinates.
I will do that, and I thank you. I know how tight your schedule was today, so I thank you for finding that block of time so you could address us this evening. Thank you, Pearl. Have a nice evening.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. And I will now go on to our next speaker, who is a member of the National Assembly, who actually got to debate and to vote on Bill 96. And that's David Bernbaum, the member for Darcy McGee, which happens to be one of the most multicultural, multiracial communities in Quebec. It includes the largest Jewish population, I believe, of any riding in Quebec, but it has enormous Black population, Asian population, South Asian population. And I know from talking to the city councilors and the mayors from this area that they're hearing from the population how concerned they are. And I'm sure, David, you are as well. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the debate at the National Assembly, and why the government seems so inflexible about incorporating even the smallest amendments that could have addressed some of the issues that were raised. You're on mute, David.
My apologies. Merci, Marvin. Thank you for this opportunity. It's quite impressive to see that we're over 150 people. I'm proud to look around and say most of whom I've had the pleasure of working with and knowing, occasionally disagreeing with. But it's already persuasive to see this august audience with all our different perspectives, but that would be united in its views, so lucidly described and explained by Maître Gray and Maître Eliadis, that this is an unjust, ill-conceived, divisive and damaging piece of legislation. I've had something of a privileged seat at the language table for the past 35 years, way back when as an information officer at the Old Protestant School Board, as Executive Director of Alliance Quebec, Executive Director of Canadian Jewish Congress Quebec region, and Executive Director of the Quebec English School Boards Association for a further 10 years. And then 8 as Parliamentary Assistant to the Premier of Quebec, and most recently as opposition critic for relations with our English-speaking community of Quebec under the leadership of Dominic Anglade. We spent, and I personally spent, along with Gaëtan Barrette and Hélène David, 200 often frustrating and divisive hours of debate and examination in commission on Bill 96 for precisely the reasons that the Julius and Pearl enumerated, and made terribly little progress despite our protestations on that list of issues you keep hearing about. And I must say, from those 35 years of experience I've had, echoed by that 200 hours, I as well have never seen such a divisive and small-minded and ill-conceived attack on the best of Quebec within Canada, not only on vulnerable communities, on all of us. I've participated in and organized meetings with premiers from Jacques Parizeau and Bernard Landry to Robert Bourassa and Jean Charest. And none of them would have, first of all, so clearly flouted basic principles of human rights, would have so clearly and deliberately proposed a retrograde, narrow, and unproductive vision of how to legitimately promote our common language in Quebec, which is French. Never have I seen so willfully dismissive a view of what Quebec's diverse communities, and namely its English-speaking community, and with great pride our Jewish community and so many others, have done to contribute to a modern Quebec and to showing us as allies and not enemies to the further promotion of French in Quebec. So it's been a deeply, deeply frustrating exercise. With respect to moving forward, and here I've got to look back for 1 second as well, one of the things that's been deeply frustrating is a very late awakening of mainstream French Quebec to the dangers of this law, with the exception, I would posit, of the Chambre de Commerce de Montréal Métropolitain and perhaps the Association des Détaillants, even the Barreau de Québec, the federations of doctors and lawyers have been deeply late, and so many have still not come on a bill that is fundamentally unjust and unproductive. So there's so much more work we have ahead of us. You've heard, and you'll clearly hear more about some legal challenges already underway. I would posit to you 3 other phenomena, 3 other paths that we should all be following. One, I'll tell you that the official opposition of Quebec, the Parti libéral du Québec, at great risk, voted against this bill. We voted against it, and we've noted that on each of the points you mentioned and on some others, a future liberal government would fix this bill. There would be no blanket recourse of notwithstanding clause. There would be no ridiculous and unjust and surely illegal parsing of the non-Francophone community into those, as Julius noted, who have access to English schooling, and those, and perhaps there are 500,000 of them, who are English speaking and under the Health and Social Services Act have the right to health and social services in English. There would be no insistence that municipalities that in peace and transparency have bilingual status, no requirement that they henceforth have referendums to recommit to that status. There would be no search and seizure completely absent from court scrutiny. And moreover, like I say, there would be no blanket recourse to defending language without it having to happen in the bright light shone by both the Canadian and the Quebec Charters of Rights and Freedoms. So we should all be vigilant about looking at those recourses. Another one I would remind us all of, whatever government is in power on October 4th in Quebec, is that any law comes to its real fruition with the accompanying regulations and decrees that follow. And so many of those are still to come. It will take great vigilance and activity and concerted effort from more than this 150 people, but from all of you and others, to understand that this game is not over, The only last thing, and I'm sure I'm out of time, and this comes from my heart, I'm not running again. We have to be careful. This is a wonderful part of Canada we live in. It has, despite this terribly serious breach, with respect, it has no lessons to learn necessarily from other jurisdictions in Canada. This is a place that values the notions of inclusion and fairness and values and welcomes immigration, despite the current government's attitudes. We need to be careful in all our diversity about keeping our kids here in this fight. I have no patience when I talk to people in our Jewish community who are telling their kids to leave. This is a great place to live, and we have so much to contribute, and we should not let anybody stop us from doing so now and in the future.
Thank you, David. You used the word dismissive, and that's a word I hear from a lot of people, including people in the Jewish community. You're going to speak later in this evening, who made minor amendment suggestions to the government of Quebec that would solve a problem for the Jewish community that applied to maybe 10 rabbis. And there was absolutely no willingness to be, flexible even on that. So we understand what you just said. I offer my apologies to Joe Artoni, who's actually the speaker before David. I have a little sheet here, and somehow my eyes glossed over Joe's name. Joe is the chair of the English Montreal School Board, and the English Montreal School Board is involved in 2 suits with the government of Quebec. The one on Bill 96, which recently received a lot of publicity, but we forget as well that there's a fundamental issue in Bill 40 about the control by the English-speaking community of their own school boards in this province by having elected school board, and the EMSB has been leading the fight on that. So ask Joe Artoni to take the floor and give an update on what the EMSB has done on both these bills and what it intends to do going forward. So.
Thank you very much, Marvin, and thank you for organizing this evening and for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak. We actually are currently in 4 active court challenges against the government. The first is not legislation; it's about school transfers that were transferred for which we contested, but we are currently in court for Bill 21, Bill 40, and Bill 96. And I'm proud to say that we were, the English Montreal School Board, we were the first to launch the challenge against Bill 96. I've lived in Quebec all my life. I was born in Montreal, and I've lived here for 41 years, and I've grown up under Liberal governments and PQ governments. And I can say that we have never had a government that is so hostile toward the English-speaking community, linguistic minorities, religious minorities, minorities in general. Bill 96 is a discriminatory piece of legislation. We know that because the purpose of the notwithstanding clause is to ensure that the laws, that sections of that law cannot be struck down on the basis of fundamental freedoms that are guaranteed in the Charter, Canadian Charter and the Quebec Charter. The interesting and ironic thing about Bill 96 is that the government tends to justify the use of the notwithstanding clause by saying, Quebec never signed on to the Canadian Constitution in 1982. We never signed on to the Charter, and it shouldn't apply to us. Well, the National Assembly unanimously adopted its own charter in 1975. The Quebec, the Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, also known as the Quebec Charter, and many of the rights guaranteed in the Quebec Charter are overlapping with the rights in the Canadian Charter. And it's unfortunate that not enough attention was brought to the rights that are suspended under Bill 96. The one that we heard the most in the media is the unlawful, the warrantless search and seizure powers that the OQLF will have. But there are many other rights that are suspended under Bill 96. Bill 96 suspends sections 2 and 7 to 15 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and it suspends sections 1 to 38 of the Quebec Charter. And I invite the public to read what those rights are, because they're now suspended when it comes to Bill 96. Everything having to do with, search and seizures of computers, of electronic devices in the workplace, and true, as was mentioned, even in the home. Professional secrecy is no longer a protected right. That means that doctor-patient privilege is no longer a protection. Attorney-client privilege is no longer a protection. And all of the judicial rights that are guaranteed in the Quebec Charter have been suspended. So the OQLF, we know, has the right to conduct inspections, investigations, issue fines, the right to understand, to be told what you're being charged with has been suspended. The right to have all evidence given to you prior to a hearing has been suspended. The right to understand, to have the hearing in a language you understand. The right to an interpreter has been suspended. The right to be represented by an attorney at the hearing has been suspended. The right to examine and cross-examine witnesses, that guaranteed right has been suspended. Double jeopardy has been suspended. So you can be tried twice for the same offense. And if you're acquitted, you can be tried again for the same offense. Now, many people have tried to dismiss this by saying, we rely on the good judgment of the people and the inspectors, that they're not going to be unreasonable. We have to remember, these are the same people that are responsible for Pastagate and some, international embarrassing incidents that have occurred over the years. Perhaps most absurd is how Bill 96 actually affects the field of education. English language school boards are now required to function in French. We are to communicate if we are more than 2 people. Our communications have to be in French. Our written communications have to be either in French or in French and English. So it's discouraging the use of English. Any discussions, any meetings, any written communications that are of non-pedagogical nature all have to happen in French, including within the school. We're talking about English schools here. These are provisions that have been now changed in the Charter of the French language, and that's the main reason why we're contesting Bill 96. We are contesting Bill 96 on 3 main points. And obviously, because of the notwithstanding clause, we cannot challenge under the provisions that the notwithstanding clause suspends. So we are challenging the bill in areas that fall outside of the notwithstanding clause. And that is one, obviously, the amendments to the Charter of the French language as it pertains to English language school boards and our obligation to function in French, and thus restrict the use of English in an English school board and restrict the use of English in English schools. The second one is the bilingualism of the courts, for which the EMSB is directly affected, since we do have court challenges in the courts right now, and perhaps in the future, who knows? With the way this government is going. But that's guaranteed in the Constitution Act. It's been there since 1867 that anybody can use English or French in any of the courts of Quebec. And the third one is the unilateral amendment to the Constitution. This it seems very evident to us that Quebec can make amendments to Quebec's constitution, but the Constitution Act of 1867 is part of the Canadian Constitution, and Quebec cannot unilaterally amend the Canadian Constitution any more than the province of Ontario could, or Manitoba, or any other province or territory. Of course, I'll just touch upon very, very briefly on Bill 21, which has the same blanket use of the notwithstanding clause, and we've always maintained that law is discriminatory as well. Many people don't know we were actually successful in our court challenge on Bill 21. The courts struck down Bill 21 as it pertains to English language school boards across Quebec. The government has appealed that decision, and that case is currently before the Court of Appeal. And we are also in court as it pertains to Bill 40. Now, Bill 40 was the government's legislation to abolish school boards and turn school boards into service centers. That law, thankfully, the English language school boards, with the leadership of the Quebec English School Boards Association, was able to suspend the application of that law as it pertains to our school boards. So the English school boards continue to exist. The status quo is in effect until we get a judgment on the merits. That case was heard in April of 2021, and it's been more than a year. So we're certain that the judge is drafting a very lengthy decision, which we can expect, I don't know, perhaps in the fall and maybe after the election. I'm not quite sure, but we should be getting it very, very soon. And the reason why that was so important, however, that we continue to operate as a school board with elected representatives elected by the English-speaking community, representing the English-speaking community, is that we were able to keep our independence, which has allowed us to do several things. Number one, it's allowed us to obviously represent the community that elects us. How have we done that? We've made sure that we fight and defend for your constitutional rights. That's why we're in court on Bill 21, and we will be in court on Bill 96. It also allowed us to make decisions that are in the best interests of the community. We spent over $1 million to purchase air purifiers at the start of the 2020 school year, in the middle of the one of the very first waves of the pandemic. And of the 9 English school boards, 4 of the 9 were able to do that and had the independence to do that. There was no service center out of the 60 French language service centers that had that independence, because the Ministry of Education said that they were not authorized to do that. So, as I said, and I'll conclude with this, it seems that minorities are not respected by this government. They keep adopting legislation repeatedly that violate our constitutional rights. And thankfully, the courts so far have recognized that and have granted us some victories and some partial victories. And we're confident that those decisions will be upheld and maintained on appeal. And so, that's why it's important to fight. It's important to defend the rights of minorities. And for me, it's important because my Quebec is inclusive. It includes everybody. It does not discriminate. And we don't want to send the message that, if you've been here for longer than 6 months and you still don't speak French, that you're not welcome here anymore. You are welcome. And we want to give everybody the opportunity to flourish and to adapt to Quebec society and send the message that that is an open society. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. I just want to point out, if the appeal court rules against English Montreal School Board on Bill 40, then you will lose your ability to function immediately, as will all the other English school boards in Quebec, and as well, your cases on Bill 21 and Bill 96 will fall as well. So it's extremely important. I find it rather curious that it's been something like 16 months since the hearing. We don't have a judgment yet on the appeal on Bill 40. Allow me to think that that's almost a good sign, I believe, in the sense that I think the judge likely to rule, but not during the electoral period. Who knows? I mean, it's a hard thing to say that justice takes note of electoral schedules, but the cynic in me believes that you're going to get that appeal. That's maybe one of the reasons we won't see it till the 5th of October or something like that. But who knows? Thank you very, very much for your time this evening. I want to introduce an old friend of mine. When I say old, I mean in terms of longevity. I have known the Honorable Arlene Jennings for almost 40 years. When I was a young counselor, I fought for civilian oversight of law enforcement in Montreal, and I had an ally in Marlene. We were able to work together to push through legislation. That legislation led to the creation of the Quebec Police Ethics Commission, which took control of police complaints out of the hands of the police and put it into a civilian body. Ever since, we worked on many things together. Marlene happened to be my MP in the Notre Dame de Grace area for many years. She is a privy councillor. She worked most recently with the Quebec Community Groups Network. I'd like to say, at least in the Anglo community in Quebec, she's a household name. Marlene, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marvin. And I'm delighted to be here this evening. I want to thank Danae Brith for organizing not just this forum, but the other conversations that you've organized in the past on Bill 96 and on a host of issues regarding discrimination, hate. You do great work. I'm particularly pleased that Joe Ortona addressed and said so clearly that Bill 96, Bill 21, Bill 40 does not represent the vision of the Quebec that we want. I agree 100%. Not only doesn't it reflect our vision, it doesn't reflect the vision that the overwhelming majority of Quebecers, regardless of linguistic origin, have of Quebec. We want an inclusive Quebec with French as the common language, but in which everyone's diversity is welcomed, embraced. I mean, when people talk about how Quebec culture is so special and distinct, one of the reasons is because you have the English-speaking minority communities. You have a whole host of ethnic and religious communities that have been in Quebec for centuries in some cases and have contributed to the diversity and the richness of Quebec culture. So, a basic tenet, as both Julius and Pearl talked about, a basic tenet of democracy is Bill of Rights or charters of rights and freedoms. And why do they exist? They exist to protect people, especially minorities, from abuse by the state. Well, here in Quebec, at the provincial level, the state includes the National Assembly, the executive, the Conseil des ministres, all of the government apparatus, all of its para-governmental apparatus, whether it's the schools, whether it's the hospitals, the liquor board, the marijuana board, Revenue Quebec, all of that. That's part of the state apparatus. And we already know that even though we are a democracy, that we have rights that are normally guaranteed under the Quebec Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the federal charter, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, even with all of that, systemic discrimination continues to exist. Systemic racism continues to exist, and in some cases flourish within our society here in Quebec. I won't even talk about the Canadian society, just going to talk about Quebec. We already know that exists. We know that institutionalized racism and discrimination exists. Anti-Black institutional racism exists. Anti-Indigenous racism and discrimination exists. And don't get me started on religious discrimination. So we already know that we have all kinds of disparities that exist within our society here in Quebec, notwithstanding our Quebec Charter and our Canadian Charter. We already know that access to services, for instance, in English, is already under threat and has been for some time. And when we know that if you're racialized, if you're a religious minority, if you're living with physical, mental, invisible handicaps, you already experience institutionalized barriers, which Bill 96 is surely going to exacerbate these very inequities. And when we talk about healthcare, there are numerous studies over the last largely 30 years, primarily in the States, but we're starting to see them in Canada, in the other provinces, that actually collect data in the health and social services that demonstrate that if you're a racialized minority, if you're an Indigenous person, and if you're Black, your access to quality healthcare is already in peril, is already diminished. So imagine when you add on this new layer of linguistic barriers. And guess what? As Maître Julius Gray and Maître Pearl Eliadis stated, the preemptive use of the notwithstanding clause ensures that that extra layer will never be addressed by the courts. And minority rights will not be protected because Bill 96, Bill 21 create charter-free zones. I'm going to end with saying that I encourage those organizations that stand up for minority rights to also look at Bill 96 through the lens of systemic discrimination, systemic racism, for racialized, for Indigenous, for people living with handicaps, visible or not visible, for minority rights. Look at it through that lens, but for the racialized and Indigenous people, please. And I'll end there.
Thank you. Thank you, Marlene, and thank you for more or less respecting your time on a good example for the rest of the evening if we're going to get through and hear everybody. Clearly adding some dimensions that we hadn't heard earlier this evening. I'd like to introduce the next speaker, who was one of the first to sound the alarm for the Jewish community, having spotted certain clauses in Bill 96 that affect the Jewish community's ability to attract clergy and seminarians from out of the province, and who approached B'nai B'rith with a proposal for a very minor amendment, which would not fix Bill 96 and which would not derail the movement that wishes to confront that bill, but which would have at least solved some small problems. We heard nothing in return from the government of Quebec. And explaining that will be Greg Borden. Maitre Borden, it's your turn.
Thank you very much.
There you go.
Okay. Thank you very much, Marvin, and thank you to everybody who's presented the big picture, if you like. But as you've just alluded to, what I'd like to focus on is what I'd like to call just a dark little corner of Bill 96, because it really does affect only a small number of individuals. But over time, it will have an enormous negative impact on the English Jewish community. Jump right to the bottom line, which Marvin has already mentioned. It is going to become increasingly, and I'd say exceedingly difficult to attract rabbis to serve in the English Jewish community in the future. Almost all rabbis come from abroad, mostly the US. That's where the schools are, that's where the population is. For a rabbi to be willing to move to Montreal, with their family, they need access to an appropriate Jewish school. The immigrants to Quebec, as you know, are required to send their children to French schools. This has not been a particular problem for rabbis until now, because they typically arrive here on temporary resident visas. If their contracts with congregations are renewed, then their temporary resident visa can be renewed as well. The charter contains an exception to the mandatory French education for temporary residents. Children of temporary residents are permitted to send their children to English school. In the past, this authorization could be renewed as long as the parent remained a temporary resident. Bill 96 has changed that. Now, from now on, a temporary resident can obtain a maximum one-time exemption of 3 years, and it is absolutely non-renewable. What that will mean is that if the rabbi's contract is renewed after 3 years, he will have to move his children into a French school, regardless of what grade he might be, regardless of the fact that he remains here as a temporary resident. Finding qualified, experienced rabbis is already challenging for the community. It will now become ever so much more difficult. And over time, the English Jewish community will find that its rabbinic leadership will be really hollowed out. The entire community, religious or not, will be hugely diminished, and it will become even more difficult than it already is, I think, to retain committed young members of the community, despite David Bernbaum's exhortations. There is already an exception in the law for diplomatic staff. We need one for English, minority, community, and religious leaders. J'avais gardé 2 minutes pour répéter, vous faire résumer en français, but given the time I see going by, I think I'll donate that time to the next speakers.
Thank you, Maitre Borden. Cogently said, and as explained, that exemption that was there before that allowed synagogues and congregations to recruit in the United States, the United Kingdom, or elsewhere, it's no longer there. And we're already hearing that candidates are more hesitant to accept offers, and in fact are declining offers that were being previously negotiated. First of all, finding someone who's an expert in the Torah is not something you're going to do off the street. And saying that a student has to go to a French language school when that French language school is not a religious school, and the rabbi and his spouse want to send that child to a religious Jewish school, means that the candidate effectively is going to decide to go elsewhere. You said we don't have a pool of rabbis large enough to meet the needs of the community. That is true. And we are a small jurisdiction that competes with other jurisdictions to get the top talent. And that talent is often American, often from the state of New York. And I've already heard on the grapevine as well that this is a major problem that has a very small solution that could easily be done. And yet we're not hearing from the government. Thank you this evening for highlighting that for us. Our next speaker is the president of the Federation of Filipino Canadian Associations of Quebec, an organization that's an umbrella organization for well over a dozen major Filipino organizations in Quebec. They represent a community of 40,000 people. Some of you on this call may know Minda Mazzoni. She is a civil rights activist. She was involved with me when I was a city councillor, and with the struggles in Montreal to stop and modify the Montreal Police street check policy of that epoch, which tended to target minorities for no apparent reason. And she has been a guest speaker at a couple of events that Bernbaum has hosted in the past. The Federation is very active in promoting the Filipino-Jewish dialogue. So I invite Minda Mazzoni to please take the floor.
Thank you so much, Marvin. Bonsoir, good evening, everybody. Je m'appelle Minda Mazzoni et je suis le président de la Fédération des associations philippines-canadiennes du Quebec. Our community is approaching 40,000 here in Quebec, in this province. There are now 1 million Filipinos in Canada, including a second, third, and even in a few cases, a fourth generation born in this country. We make up nearly 3% of the Canadian population and continue to be one of the fastest growing immigrant groups. We're proud Canadians, and we are proud of our Filipino origin and heritage. The Philippines was a Spanish colony for over 300 years, followed by a period of American rule until independence was achieved in 1946. During the long period of colonialism, Filipinos maintained their language and culture. During the American period, English became a common language being taught in school. That has continued since, and it's rare to find a Filipino who does not speak English, in addition to Tagalog, our national language, or Cebuano, or Ilocano, or Hiligaynon, or another of our many regional languages. You will find it hard to meet a Filipino anywhere who does not speak English. You will also find it just as hard to find a young Filipino in Quebec today who does not speak French. We see knowledge of languages as an advantage. Perhaps that's why our young people here in Quebec, who are obliged by Bill 101 to register for school in French, almost always become fluent in the language. We categorically reject the slanders of persons in the government of Quebec that immigrants do not integrate. The facts are the opposite. Young Filipinos speak French, English, and generally at least one, if not more, other languages. They're economically competitive and rebut the assertion that French is threatened in Quebec. Our community is very proud of Stephanie Valenzuela, Montreal City Councilor, a person who speaks 4 languages, English, French, Tagalog, Spanish, and who advocates for us at City Hall. But many of our seniors arrived before Bill 101 and do not speak French. We worry that they will be impacted by Bill 96. They're not historic Anglophones. They did not attend high school in Canada. They worry that a strict application of the law will exclude them from the English language services they previously enjoyed, particularly for access to health care. No government of Canada has been more hostile to minorities than the Legault government in Quebec. Canada is built on immigration, inclusion, and opportunity. Despite a growing labor shortage, the government of Quebec seeks to reduce immigration. Bill 21 is openly discriminatory. It tells highly qualified people that they will not be hired due to their faith and identity. No other state or province pretends that discrimination is in the public interest, and of course, Quebec cannot offer proof. That's its absurd argument that Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, and others being excluded from public employment in the province has said at least the least public benefit. We would say that the results are the opposite. Quebec's reputation has been internationally tarnished, and our ability to attract top talent to the province is diminished. Filipinos excel in the healthcare sector. Hospitals everywhere in Canada have Filipino doctors, nurses, orderlies, and other workers. Bill 96 now says that new arrivals from the Philippines must be fluent in French in 6 months. These new immigrants lose the right to government services in that time frame. The message to these potential new Quebecers is clear, saying, go to Toronto, and I must inform you that they will. Quebec has become an unwelcoming place. Unfortunately, Filipinos worldwide are increasingly aware that coming to Quebec means less opportunity and more obstacles than moving to any other province. The words "that's with Santa Claus" are becoming internationally known. People are astounded that fundamental rights, constitutionally guaranteed, can be torn up so easily. Federation of Filipino-Canadian Associations of Quebec, thanks be thy breath for convening this forum. Thank you, Marvin. We urge the groups that are here this evening to work together and initiate a challenge to Bill 96 or join an existing one. We wish to publicly state our support to the existing challenges of Bill 21 and 40. Thank you, Marvin, for putting this forum together, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minda. There's a lot of passion in what you said. I'd like to make 2 comments. When I was a city councillor, I was once asked to come speak to the students at École des Nations in my district, a French language school, where 99% of the students came from immigration. It was very diverse. Half the kids were Filipino, the rest were basically South Asian. All the children spoke fluent French, all of them. But they also spoke English. And the Filipino kids often spoke in Tagalog to each other. And the Bangladeshi kids spoke in Bengali. And there was no problem. They all spoke perfect French. And that's the face of Quebec. People can exist in many languages. French is a common language, but people have their own identities and they're proud of it. The other thing you said, unfortunately, seems too true. The bill seems to define Anglophones very narrowly. And I hear from many older people who did not go to school in this province that they feel they will have less access to vital services, particularly in healthcare, because they're not considered to be historic Anglophones. They went to school in the Philippines or somewhere else. They speak English, either as a first language, second or third language. But however, and many of them were here before Bill 101 was even adopted, yet they may well lose rights that they've had for the entire time that they've been in Quebec. Thank you so much for delivering your message this evening. Before I go to our next speaker, I'd like to note the presence of Jennifer Macaron, the MNA for Westmount St. Louis, who is with us. Welcome, Jennifer, as well. Our next speaker is someone I say needs no introduction, but you may not all know him. His name is Pho Nyemi. He is Executive Director of CRAR, an organization that is respected everywhere in this province for standing up for civil rights, fighting systemic racism, fighting police brutality, fighting for charter rights, a small organization that has had a more than outsized impact in making Montreal and Quebec a better place. For transparency's sake, I want everyone to know that Pho and I have collaborated on dozens of files when I was a city councillor, but I have to say this, I have the greatest respect for the work that he does. Pho, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marvin. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Thank you very much for inviting me tonight. Je voudrais remercier tout le monde, surtout Marvin, de m'avoir invité à ce forum ce soir. Je vais essayer de faire ça surtout en anglais, mais je vais aussi faire quelques commentaires en français. First of all, I would like to address the issue of Bill 96 within the broader social, political, and possibly cultural context. I think that we heard not enough about the law and the legal constitutional dimensions of Bill 96. So I'd like to address the issue from the broad perspective of human and minority rights, but from a more social perspective. It's worth to mention that this year marks the 40th anniversary of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And then we have legislation such as Bill 96. I must say we also have Bill 32, which, by the way, makes academic freedom and women's trump over issues such as slurs and other offensive terms. We also have late last year, the decision of the Supreme Court in the Ward case, which basically creates now a freedom for everyone to insult other people based on race, religion, sexual orientation without any consequence or protection of the Charter against discrimination and violation of the civil rights. So what I'm trying to point out is basically there's a current in the Western society, I believe, and in North America, in Quebec, of a conservative cultural growth, a conservative cultural revolution that basically is an attack and assault on human rights and equality rights as we've known it during recent years. I would like to address some of these issues through questions that I have identified, but that I have not been able to find an answers to. My first question is, how do we get here? How do we move from a concept of a civic, inclusive, diverse Quebec society of the 90s, of the early 2000s, to a concept of a Quebec society that is increasingly ethno-linguistically based, and that basically creates more of the solitudes, not only between the Francophone majority and the Anglophone minorities, but also among the different communities in the Quebec society and Montreal as we know it. How have we moved basically from a society that basically values fundamental human rights to a society now that basically puts majority rights over and ahead of minority rights? And again, these cultural war issues require a little bit of thinking and reflection of the historical perspective and with broader global context. For example, has the rise of anti-globalism could contribute to what we see now today in Quebec with Bill 96, Bill 21, Bill 40, Bill 32, and other legislations of a similar kind? Have we forgotten to work together with the Francophone society, Francophone groups in addressing kitchen table issues that are pressing and critical nature to everyone regardless of ethnicity and language, therefore creating more division along ethno-linguistic lines? Some of these kitchen table issues are universal. The crisis in housing, inflation, climate change, sexual violence. We don't hear the voice of English-speaking community groups in current debates on these issues. And these are kitchen tables that a lot of Francophones, particularly those of the younger generation between the age of 18 to 40, relate to. And that's also the generation that's possibly much more open to diversity and the English language and the English practice of Quebec. Have we voluntarily given up on reclaiming or defining more municipal space for English-speaking people in Montreal? I didn't hear any English-speaking groups react to the creation by the city of Montreal of the Comité sur la langue française de la ville de Montréal, in which Louise Baudouin and Louise Harel were appointed. And how would that impact the climate here in Montreal? We don't know. Well, the next question I have here is that where are the Francophone allies? Where are the Francophone partners in this basically shared concern over the constitutionality of Bill 96 with regard to both the Canadian Charter and the Quebec Charters? Where are the voices of our Francophone friends? And where are the voices of our First Nations, especially in the age of reconciliation? How many English-speaking groups are working with First Nation people and with the Francophone groups in sharing some of the concerns? We don't have that cohesion that we used to see in the 90s and the early 2000s as much as we would like to believe. And my last question is, where is this rising of the next generation of young people of all ethno-linguistic backgrounds who have a different vision of Quebec and of Montreal? We don't hear enough from them. We don't see enough of them talking about these issues, maybe because they're more concerned about kitchen table issues of their own generation, such as tuition fees, inflation, finding a job, finding adequate housing in Montreal. And together, this new generation of all ethno-linguistic backgrounds, I believe, can be a very powerful voice to address some of the injustices of Bill 96. So I would like to end by saying that I believe that we have to redefine an equilibrium, new partnerships, new strategic alliances, and new friendships among all the people who make up at least Montreal and Quebec, especially across generation lines, across class lines, and also across basically age cleavages. Because we cannot afford to have a society based on us versus them, in which we gain and we lose. Il faut qu'on définisse un concept de nous, un concept de nous tous et nous tous ensemble de manière beaucoup plus collective, inclusive et équitable. Parce que je crois qu'on est dans l'ère d'une nouvelle génération, mais le défi est comment rejoindre et mobiliser cette nouvelle génération de Québécoises et de Québécois de toutes les origines afin de bâtir la vision de le Québec en eux. Merci.
Merci Faux, j'ai bien apprécié vos mots, mais je me trouve un peu déprimant. I know those people are out there. Just the right words have to be said, the right appeal has to be made. I'm sure that the community, as diverse as it is, Anglophone, Francophone, and Allophone, are willing to work together. These laws are so egregious, particularly Bill 96. I'm sure the movement is there. It just takes the spark to get it started. Our next speaker actually has a slightly different perspective. Our next speaker contacted me. She is a student at McGill University, and she and others have penned a very cogent, intelligent letter, which they're circulating. They are in the healthcare domain, studying different fields, and they find that Bill 96 infringes on the professional codes of conduct, professional codes of ethics that govern these professions. They also see healthcare providers' main duties being to their patients and their patients' well-being, rather than a law that requires them to work in a particular way. So I'm going to ask Danielle Fox to tell us a bit about the group that's formed at McGill, what they're doing, and what the letter says. Danielle?
Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be participating in such a diverse forum that highlights the inequities exacerbated by Bill 96. As Marvin said, my name is Danielle Fox, and I'm a Bachelor of Science candidate at McGill University. I'm also one of 4 authors of On Bill 96 and Quebec Healthcare, which is an article outlining the implications of Bill 96 on healthcare delivery, particularly for vulnerable immigrant populations. It is available for free on the front page of the website Healthy Debates, and I've also linked it in the chat. My collaborators are in the audience today, Cynthia Ventrella, Fadi Tuma, and Adamo Donovan. While studying and working in healthcare in Quebec, we have seen firsthand how COVID-19 has exposed systemic flaws in the medical system. Most recently, more COVID deaths halfway through 2022 than in all of 2021, and 1.5 million Quebecers with no family physician, which is an approximately 4-fold increase in the last 4 years. While Quebec members of the National Assembly have stated that Bill 96 will not impact healthcare delivery, health services are not explicitly excluded. We have identified 2 key ways in which Bill 96 will rattle our already fragile system and incur increasing financial and human costs. First, Bill 96 obstructs healthcare professionals from upholding the ethical standards that are mandated by their certifying bodies. There are several examples of how this bill conflicts with the criteria for licensure that has been set by the Canadian Medical Association, the Canadian Association for Critical Care Nurses, and l'Ordre des Psychologues du Québec. The foundation of healthcare is the practitioner's commitment to do no harm. One aspect of this, as stated in the CMA Code of Ethics, is the obligation to seek advice and support from colleagues in challenging circumstances. Bill 96 prevents medical professionals from using a professional translator, transferring patients to a multilingual facility, or transferring them to a colleague fluent in a patient's native language, even if that language is French. Obstructing a healthcare provider's access to outside help means that they must provide less than optimal care and act against the best interests of the patient. This is ground for its professional consequences, including license revocation. Moreover, patients must give informed consent based on an adequate explanation of treatment processes, risks, and alternatives. If practitioners cannot convey this information such that it is fully understood by the patient, that is, in a language that they understand, proceeding with medical care breaches their bodily autonomy, and legal action, including negligence or assault charges, can then be taken against a healthcare worker. Therefore, Bill 96 forces practitioners into making an impossible choice. On the one hand, they could abide by Bill 96 and accept the consequences of poor practice due to miscommunication, or on the other, they could violate the law and be subject to punitive government fines that would derail their practice regardless. In the battle between law and license, there is a key piece of collateral damage: the patient. According to the Quebec Institute of Public Health, patients who are provided care in a non-mother tongue are more likely to receive an inappropriate diagnosis and prescription, as well as experience further complications and longer hospitalization. A recent study in the Canadian Medical Journal has demonstrated that treatment in a native language actually reduces patient mortality by 54%. So access to translation is clearly a matter of life and death, particularly for the 10% of Quebec's population whose mother tongue is neither English nor French. Bill 96 suggests that consequences can be avoided if immigrants learn French in 6 months. But is this feasible? The U.S. Foreign Service Institute estimates that learning French takes over 600 hours for Anglophones who have post-secondary education. Immigrants would therefore require a minimum of 25 hours per week of instruction to become proficient in French in 6 months, which is equivalent to a part-time job. The Quebec government's own report has confirmed that this period is not realistic, but a proposed amendment to extend the timeline has already been rejected. For these reasons, we think we should re-examine the bill's impacts in the medical sector. As put by the editor of the suburban newspaper, Beryl Weisman, compassion should be the only language of health, and we couldn't agree more. If you'd like to support our work, please consider signing the petition linked in the article on healthy debates. And if you have any questions or interested in collaborating going forward, you can contact me at danielle.fox@mail.mcgill.ca. Thank you, Marvin, and thank you everyone for your time.
Marvin, you're on mute.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Danielle. We appreciate the work that you and your 3 collaborators are doing. You're raising very important issues. Clearly, compassion should be the only metric when it comes to patient care. And the possibility of error, misdiagnosis, wrong medication, wrong dosages increases when there's confusion. Obviously, it's to be avoided. And this is going to clearly create a huge moral dilemma for many in the medical profession. Having said that, I would like to ask if we can circulate your website link to interested parties, not only on this call tonight, but others who weren't here who would probably be interested to read the Healthy Debates document that you've written.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. And I hope we will be able to stay in touch with you and your collaborators and work together. La prochaine personne qui va parler demande au MOS de la communauté Amadea qui est dans Montréal-Nord, demande Nabil Murta. Je ne sais pas si l'imam va parler en français or whether he's going to speak in English or both, but I welcome you on this call, and I hope it will be the beginning of a relationship. We haven't talked much as communities, and hopefully we will going forward. Imam?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. Que la paix et les bénédictions de Dieu soient sur vous tous. Tout d'abord, j'aimerais remercier Benet Brith pour m'avoir invité à ce forum très important. Je pense que unis aujourd'hui des gens de différentes confessions ou de même pas de confession, C'est un plaisir d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui. Donc, j'aimerais, I would like to first thank everyone and those the organizers to invite us for this very, very important event. We've seen that since few months, minorities are being targeted, especially with Bill 21. And I just remember a few years ago when my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law visited us here in Quebec. We went to Quebec City, and my mother-in-law, who are from Britain, so they were speaking in English, and she said those words, and to me, she said, you know, we were in Quebec City, and she said, these people here are so nice. They're better than Brits. So we have to remember that what is being portrayed here by, it's not Quebec. The people that we know are more inclusive, and regardless of our differences, of our religious differences, we have to come out more stronger. And as the previous speaker has said, compassion should be the key, because we have to remember what type of society we want to build. We want to live together regardless, you know, of our differences, of whatever languages that we speak. For example, in our community, of course, the main language which is used in our different session here is French. So we agree that the main language in Quebec is French, and this should be learned and taught to our youngsters as well. But in our events, we also agree that we have people who do not understand French, and we have the facility of translating, which is also available. So what I want to say is, with Bill 21, which, you know, marginalized a group of people because of their religious attire, it's something which is against the basic human rights, against freedom of religion and conscience. And with regard to Bill 96, what I want to say is, I'll say it in French and then in English as well. I just want to say that pour certains, la loi 96, cette pièce législative est nécessaire afin de réitérer et préserver le fait français au Québec, alors que pour d'autres, cette loi brime certains aspects de nos droits fondamentaux. Peu importe dans quel camp nous sommes, je crois ce qu'il importe dans ce débat est d'écouter et entendre les doléances des plus vulnérables de notre société. Il est certes indéniable pour les nouveaux arrivants d'apprendre la langue commune afin de bien s'intégrer à la société d'accueil. Mais je voudrais porter votre attention vers un aspect méconnu du débat et qui est souvent oublié. Je parle ici de l'impact de la loi 96 sur les communautés de nos frères et sœurs issus des Premières Nations. Je voudrais qu'on soit tous plus attentifs à ce qu'ils ont à dire, le long chemin vers la réconciliation que le pape François a également voulu entamer lors de sa récente visite, exige que nous abordions les enjeux de notre société moderne de façon inclusive. So we have to remember that we all have to live together. And in this regard, we have to care for each other. And I think this is something very important. We cannot create a divisive society, and we have to be united. And we hope and pray that, you know, we are going through a very critical time right now. There are many conflicts, economic crisis, inflation, and there are already so many frustrations in our lives, especially with COVID, which was, of course, not a good part of our lives. But again, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community is, of course, there to with all of our brothers and sisters, and we shall stand for each other. And again, I want to extend our hand as a Muslim community to our brothers of Jewish faith, of Sikh faith, of Christian faith. Even if you do not have any faith, we will be there for you and we will stand for you. Thank you very much.
Merci, Imam. Your words indicating that this is not what Quebecers are about. David Bernbaum said the same thing. Many others have said the same thing. The bill doesn't reflect the reality many of us have lived. And in regard to Bill 21, as Minda Mazzoni said in her speech, that there is no other jurisdiction in North America that has a law like this, which excludes qualified candidates, often the best candidates for all sorts of public employment. And no case has ever been made by the government of Quebec that doing so is in the public interest. In fact, I believe we will soon discover that the government of Quebec will be unable to defend that position. And certainly, it's caused all sorts of problems in employment in all sorts of public institutions where candidates are no longer coming forward because, in theory, they can't be hired. And this is something we need to fight at the same time we're fighting the other bills. Thank you very much again for being here this evening. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is well known, again, as a civil libertarian, and that is Mr. Bashir Hussain, who is the president of the Council of South Asian Communities. Mr. Hussain was a founder of the Muslim-Jewish dialogue that was prominent in Montreal about 15 years ago, and has been involved in issues at the municipal level to promote civil rights. Like Madame Mazzoni was one of the leaders who was involved in questioning the police street check policy and winning changes to that. So I'm going to ask Bashir Hussain to take the floor and speak. Bashir?
Yes, thank you very much, Marvin, to give me a chance to speak to all my friends. There are a lot of friends are here, like David Bernbaum and all other people, and it's a real good time that Marlene Jennings was also a very good friend of mine. But anyway, I'm executive director for Council of South Asian Communities. I'm here for 59 years, and I don't want to repeat the same thing many people have have said about Bill 21, Bill 96, and Bill 40. So I want to tell about what the Council of South Asian Communities. Council of South Asian Communities consists of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Nepal, and there are about 150,000 people living in Montreal. And I never thought at one time that the Jantalong, the street of Jantalong belonged to the South Asian communities, and then the park extension is belonged to the South Asian communities. And these are the things that we started working, and then there was no discrimination. And I'm one of the founder of the first Islamic Center in Montreal in 1963, and we built the first mosque because of Mr. John Lasage. At that time, he was premier, and then he helped us out, and the Jewish people helped us out. And I was co-chair for Jewish Muslim Dialogue from 1990 to 2004. But unfortunately, that Mr. Eddie Volkov, he passed away, and then after that we didn't do it. See, whatever there is a discrimination in Bill 21, Bill 96, because if the people are wearing hijab, which is according to Islamic religion, they cannot have any good job in Quebec. The same thing with the Sikh people, because they are having turban, so they are not interested, they are not welcome anything. These are the things that created problems. My children, they speak, and everybody's children, they speak beautifully French, beautiful English, and there is no problem. But the thing is, they don't want to live in that way. Ontario province, Ontario is inviting people to come from Montreal, so because they have no discrimination, and they want to, and the kids, they want to look for their future, and their future is in Toronto, so they are moving on. But so that's why what I'm saying, that we are ready, the Council of South Asian Communities is ready to help B'nai B'rith, whatever the action they will take, and under the leadership of Mr. Marvin Rotra. And I'm always friend of Marvin, and I will remain, and then I will help try to do whatever is possible. And all the people from South Asian, they are all ready to help. They are ready to do that one. Now you can see the time is coming up. Our children has to get elected in the provincial and municipal level. At least we have Samir Zubairi. He's the member of parliament for Dollard, and then there is another gentleman also. So these are the things that we have to come. We know that when we came very long period of time, we have taken that one. But the thing is, we did it that one. What we are saying, that we don't want any discrimination, because if there is a discrimination, then we cannot progress that. We cannot progress in country, in the world. Even so many things have been signed by Canada under the auspices of United Nations. No discrimination should be held, and then there is a discrimination, and we have to fight for that. And what I'm saying, that instead of repeating the same thing, what we are doing, we want to cooperate with other organizations who are going to fight under the auspices of, and I really appreciate Bernard that Mr. Marvin Rotra, I know him when, for a long time, for 30, 35 years, something, and he's taking care of it. And then we are ready to participate in any way, any shape, any way, we are ready to help. And then, there are so many of my friends, they spoke today, and then it was very nice. Thank you very much, Marvin, for giving me a time to speak. Instead of repeating the same thing, I want to change the subject. Thank you.
Marvin, you're on mute.
Thank you, Bashir. I want to say that Bill 21 really affects communities. I worked very closely with a young Sikh woman who was extremely articulate, very bright, spoke French perfectly, had so much to contribute to this province, and wanted to make teaching her career, except that avenue was closed to her. She ended up moving to British Columbia, where she is now a very successful teacher. The message it sends to young Jews who wear kippah, who might want to pursue, all sorts of jobs, is that you're just not wanted. The same with Muslim women with hijab. There is no other jurisdiction that does this. I'm glad you raised the issue again, because it rankles people. It really does. We still hear that people are hoping that ultimately the courts will strike down this bill. Mr. Ortona said at the beginning of the call that a very small part of Bill 21 was struck down as it pertains to English language school boards, but that's it. The rest of the bill is still on the books. We have 3 more speakers and then a few minutes for questions. I'm going to introduce Ramon Vicente, who is the president of the Filipino Family Services, a organization that is a partner actually with the City of Montreal and has helped on food security issues, particularly during the pandemic, delivering food to vulnerable seniors. And our organization has also been very outspoken on issues of civil rights, issues of police brutality, etc. I see some people have their hands up. I'm taking a list, but we're going to let our speakers finish before we go to question period. So I'm going to ask Mr. Vicente to take the floor.
Thank you, Marvin, for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. I will be brief and short because time is almost in a very late evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ramon Vicente, and I would like to make a short statement tonight. Filipino Family Service has no problem with encouraging people to learn and to speak French. However, we see Bill 96 as one that is punitive and does not foster French language at all. The bill disenfranchises an existing population that did not go to high school in Canada and therefore does not qualify for English language services here in Quebec. Bill 96 cuts the number of people who can be served in English in half. That will be the case for most Filipinos who came here as immigrants. Their children are fluent in French, but they largely speak English as a second language and no longer are eligible to obtain a wide range of essential services in their second language. Therefore, our organization wants to note the following. Instead of just applying the notwithstanding clause to specific parts of Bill 96, the government has applied the clause to the entire bill. This unprecedented in suppressing all the fundamental freedoms guaranteed by the Canadian and Quebec Charter of Rights. The bill obviously suppresses the freedoms of expression, religion, peaceful assembly and association, the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, the right to be free from unreasonable search or seizure, the right to be free from arbitrary detention or imprisonment, and the right to be free from cruel and unusual treatment. Bill 96 is a major threat to democracy, and for the reason alone it needs to be contested. Prior to Bill 96, only businesses with 50 employees or more had to have a plan to ensure French was the common language of the workplace. That included having a French committee and a certificate from the government validating that the business's common language is French. Now, these requirements will apply to smaller businesses having 25 or more employees. The bill adds substantial costs for small businesses, but offers no funding to offset the increased cost of meeting the law's requirements. Minority-owned businesses are particularly impacted, and we are already hearing of those who say will relocate out of province. The new law gives the Office Quebec de la Langue Française authority to override the basic freedoms guaranteed by the Charter of Rights, both in Canada and Quebec, meaning inspectors can make seizures without warrants. This is against any conception Canadians have about the rule of law. It's what happens in dictatorships. In the area of digital business, it is almost an invitation to every small business to move across the border. I will be brief tonight. The bill's restriction on English in the courts, on civil documents, limiting English colleges, health services, and so on, must be all opposed. The many restrictions imposed by Bill 96 that do nothing to enhance French language. They merely trivialize the role English has played as a historic language in Quebec, and they reduce the access to English speakers to many services they have always enjoyed. To respect the time limit of other speakers, I conclude by saying that Filipino Family Service would be interested in associating with others or collaborating with the other organizations to contest this odious law. Thank you very much. Have a good evening and Shabbat Shalom to all my Jewish friends.
Thank you very much, Ramon. Chilling words in many, many ways, but what you said is how a very large part of Quebec's population is beginning to perceive this particular bill. I thank you also for your offer to collaborate to contest and oppose parts of the bill. As I mentioned at the beginning of the call, we have one of our lawyers on this call. We will come back to all the groups with a summary of where we're going. This call was the follow-up to what people asked us after our press conference. Clearly, more needs to be done. Before we get to a few minutes of questions, I want to get the last speaker in, and that's City Councillor Sonny Morose, the beautiful district of Snowden in the borough of Côte-Neige, NDG in the city of Montreal. Monsieur le conseiller, c'est vous.
Merci, monsieur le conseiller. Mon nom est Sonny Morose, j'ai été élu en novembre et honnêtement, c'est un privilège d'être ici, d'être capable de parler parmi les leaders communautaires qui savent comment les impacts de la loi 96 vont vraiment se matérialiser ici dans nos communautés du ouest de Montréal. I want to thank everyone for coming here. I think my dad's still on the line. I appreciate that. My dad and my mom made a decision to send all 4 of their Anglophone kids to French school when they're in elementary. We all work here in Quebec. We all have integrated perfectly. On parle puis on opère ici au Québec. D'une façon, de leur génération, ils pensaient que c'était la façon de faire. It was the right thing to do. Ça nous donne les privilèges d'être complètement capables de travailler à l'intérieur de la société où est-ce qu'on se trouve. Et honnêtement, avec cette loi ici, 96, bien sûr, on peut parler des autres lois néfastes et je salue tout ce que B'nai B'rith, the MSB, the other organizations that are here, there's other elected officials as well as Consul General from the Republic of Korea, which are here. I appreciate everybody being on call because to keep it very short, we need to do things moving forward in order to not be put in a position where the right decisions of the past end up not being the right decisions for the future. We need to continue to push forward to make sure that this is the worst that it can get. And hearing, and I appreciate also the contributions of the McGill students. I think the document it is very comprehensive, as well as Professor Ellie Alice. Pearl, she wrote a fantastic article. These are resources that we need to start putting together in a way that we don't have to keep having the same conversations over and over again. In order to build on what we're developing here in this conversation, to build what's happening, there was a meeting at Karina's on Crescent last week. There's a meeting tomorrow in St. Leonard with other groups and organizers, and I appreciate Mario, who posted in the chat, for coming as well. These are things that are now snowballing to a place where they weren't last year when we were in the same position. When they went to the committees that David Bernbaum spoke of, there was no progress made. We were not able to improve this bill, despite there needing to be changes. And as an elected official in Montreal, I also want to thank the other elected officials from the other demerged municipalities, namely DDO, who are here, as well as other candidates. It's important to point that it's not easy to be against a popular bill in Quebec. And it's because people aren't well enough informed. You know, we can explain and we can go through and we can challenge in court, but they can still pass it with a majority. And that's how a democracy works. So we need to use the tools that democracy allows a minority to use outside of the courts. And that goes through mobilization, that goes through education, and that goes through gathering together on common themes to make sure that we as a community have our values, our rights, and our freedoms protected here in Quebec, just like the majority wants. And to understand the values that were put forward in some of the commentary of the people that spoke before me, we have enough ammunition. We need to start putting a concrete mobilization plan together to make sure that we can educate, we can inform, and we can make sure that this doesn't happen again in terms of a law being passed without consultation with the people being impacted mostly. I appreciate also the Filipino community, the Muslim community, the Jewish community to come together. I'm telling you that there are other communities who are also speaking on this matter. They don't know where to go to. They don't know where the representation is and how to improve it. So,
what? Go where?
Thank you. So just to end, I thank everyone for coming. I thank Marvin Rotran, Michael Mostyn for putting this together. Again, this is not easy. We need to get together in order to make sure that the decisions we're making now that are right for everyone continue to be the right decisions moving forward, and the goalposts aren't continuously moved and expectations aren't changed for people coming in here and establishing themselves as individuals, as immigrants, and coming in here and moving from other provinces and understanding and learning that it's not as easy. And we have the documentation, we have the information, we need to start mobilizing on a more regular basis. So I tend to repeat myself to make the point hammer home. I'm here, as well as other elected officials from the opposition in the city of Montreal, to listen and mobilize. And there's a provincial election coming up. If I can really impose one more thing, and I said I was going to be short, these people are looking for votes. All the elected officials, all the candidates are looking for votes in this election. I encourage you to email anyone you consider voting for, calling them, going to their offices during the election period, and telling them why and how you care about this bill. And ask them for expectations so that you can know that your vote counted on this point towards them. We all need to vote, we all need to mobilize, and we all need to get informed so that more people come out and understand how this bill is being impacted, because once they do, the facts will speak for themselves. Thank you for everyone for coming tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Moroz. Your message is actually hopeful and upbeat, and you've answered the questions Phonyemi asked. Where are the young people? Where are different communities? You're saying the more information we have out there, the more informed people become, the less they support this bill, and the more they're ready to fight it. The more we're seeing, the larger the mobilization becomes and the coalition against the bill becomes. I think you have a future in leading this struggle. I want to apologize to Gemma Rayburn. I actually just had an eye test recently, and I actually passed. My eyes are pretty good for a person my age, but I do have reading glasses, and I left those in Toronto at my son's place when I was last there. So I've skipped over a couple of names, and I unfortunately skipped over Gemma's name. Most of you must know Gemma as a leader of the Black community in Montreal, the president of Playmas Caribbean Cultural Association and vice president of Spice Island Cultural Day. Gemma has been a person who has a long history in Montreal for fighting for civil rights, speaking up against discrimination, and has become a well-known leader, not only in the Black community, but among those who defend civil rights. Gemma, will you take the floor?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Marvin. Thank you for inviting me. Bonsoir, tout le monde. Good evening. Playmas Montreal is a cultural organization that has been active in Montreal for many years. We represent persons from every nation in the English-speaking Caribbean. My name is Gemma Rayburn, as Marvin said, and I have the honor of serving as Playmas Montreal's president. While we are largely a cultural organization, we also fight for civil rights. We were part of the large coalition that demanded a change in the discriminatory street check policy practiced by Montreal police until recently. We stand with other communities in the time of need. We were a voice denouncing anti-Asian racism and express support for the Chinese community when vandals targeted Chinatown during the height of the COVID pandemic. We have denounced anti-Semitism and stood with the Jewish community, and we are proud to be one of the first community associations to have adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. We are on the record as calling Bill 21 bigotry, because that is what it is. When you deny a person a job for which they are qualified and for which they may be the best candidate because of their faith, it is religious discrimination, pure and simple. Now we face another law that takes Quebec ethno-nationalism to another level, and that is Bill 96. For the first time, we have had the use of the notwithstanding clause by a provincial legislature to override every basic freedom guaranteed by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The novelty of Bill 96 is that rather than applying the clause to specific sections of the bill, the government of Quebec has applied the clause to the entire bill, making every aspect of the law supposedly shielded from legal challenges based on the Charter. Persons of Caribbean origin and heritage have contributed greatly to Canada's success. In 2019, the Government of Ontario adopted Bill 139, creating Caribbean Heritage Month in the province. Today, Ontario is celebrating its 4th Caribbean Heritage Month. Bill 139's preamble recognizes the economic, political, social, and cultural achievements and contributions of Caribbean Canadians in all aspects of Ontario's society. I say bravo to them. It's a different message in Quebec. Immigration from the Caribbean to Quebec is a trickle. The Caribbean community is an older one with little renewal. The situation is bad enough, but now under Bill 96, many of us are not considered Anglophone, and we worry about access to services. You can imagine that prospective immigrants from Grenada, Jamaica, Barbados, or elsewhere in the English-speaking Caribbean see Ontario as a far more welcoming choice than Quebec. We do not see Bill 96 as improving the quality of French in schools or supporting people to strengthen their French language skills, but a law that attacks English language rights. We do not accept the premise that French is threatened in Quebec. The data used is purposely skewed to adopt a law that tells seniors of Caribbean origin that they are likely ineligible for crucial services they have previously enjoyed in English. Bill 99 provides no explicit exemption for the health and social services for English-speaking seniors who were born outside Canada and did their schooling back home. Bill 96 limits the right to communicate with government officials in English and restricts the use of English before the court. Bill 96 gives powers to language inspectors that allow search and seizure without warrant or court oversight. Playmas Montreal stands ready to join the others here tonight to challenge Bill 96 in court. Thank you. Have a good evening et bonsoir. Merci.
Thank you, Gemma, for your words. I happen to know that you didn't go to high school here in Quebec. I happen to know that while English is your mother tongue, under this law, you probably wouldn't be considered an Anglophone and you could lose access to services. And I understand that a prospective immigrant from one of the countries you mentioned, whether it's St. Lucia, Grenada, St. Vincent, the Grenadines, Jamaica, wherever, looks at this, and Toronto seems a lot more attractive to them, and that's really a shame. I again apologize. I skipped over several speakers before I get the floor to Sunny, and our last speaker for the evening is Mr. Mark Groisberg, who is the president of the United Community of Russian-Speaking Jews of Quebec. I want to alert everyone on this call, there's a substantial Jewish population from the former Soviet Union in Montreal, from Ukraine, from Moldova, from Russia, from Kazakhstan, and others of the former republics of the Soviet Union. And I think we're going to hear from Mr. Groisberg, who spoke at our June 13th press conference, many of the same observations that Gemma Rayburn and Minda Mazzoni and Ramon Vicente gave concerning people who did their schooling outside the province, who immigrated here, who speak English either as a mother tongue or their common language and have always had services in English before and now may not get it. Mr. Groisberg, I invite you to address the audience. Mark, we can't hear you. No, I think we have lost Mr. Groisberg.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marvin, for organizing this very important event. Thank you for inviting me. I want to make a few points about this bill, what accepted by Quebec government and why it is very dangerous. I arrived to Canada 32 years ago from a country that does not exist now, from the USSR. After the collapse of this country, many immigrants came to Canada searching for freedom and better life for themselves, and they found this in this country. But unfortunately, the current government of Quebec need to consolidate its power, its popularity, and move closer to sovereignty and secession of Quebec from Canada. Bill 21 targets racial and religious minorities in Canada. The bill is direct attack on citizen religious freedom and freedom of expression, as it will deprive them of the opportunity to work in certain professions. The government of Quebec decided to create a secular society. In my former homeland, we have already gone through this. I was born and live in small historical town in Ukraine, Kam'yanets-Podilsky. Before the October Revolution, in the city with a population of 45,000, there were 32 synagogues, 17 Orthodox churches, 7 Catholic churches, 3 monasteries, 2 seminaries, and 2 yeshivas. Yes, one cannot fail to mention the pogroms, but all the community, and there were many of them. There was Jewish community in the city, an Armenian community, Polish community, Russian community, and everyone lived more or less tolerantly. But when the Bolsheviks took power in 1917, tolerance disappeared. All religious institutions closed. Lenin proclaimed that religion is opiate of the people. Many religious figures perished in Gulag camps. Throughout the history of the existence of the Soviet Union, a discriminatory policy toward nation minority was pushed, and the Jews suffered especially. It was possible to practice Judaism in several large cities, and them under supervision of the KGB. In many cities, religious people, or just more who wanted to know the history and their people, were subject to repression. People were arrested for celebration religious holidays, studying Hebrew, reading Jewish books. They were popularly called the prison of Zion. That was Natan Sharansky, who served 10 years in prison. The government of Quebec, with the help of the majority in the National Assembly, is increasingly attacked our right by trampling on our freedom given to us by Canada. Another attack of our right, Quebec politicians approved Bill 96, the government controversial proposal law to protect the French language in the province. As far as healthcare is concerned, the law stipulated the medical services in English can be obtained if you are an English-speaking Quebecer or recent immigrant or tourist, you can receive it in English. However, Robert Leakey, Dean of McGill University School of Law, said it was not clear when the healthcare system would be allowed to apply the exemption. He noted that Bill 96 is sure to somehow violate Canada's Federal Health Act, which guarantees access to care. Federal law will prevail, but it's not clear if it will come to that in practice. Quebec doctors say French language support plan will harm patients. What worries us most about the adopted laws in healthcare and education? Healthcare affected 1/3 of the population in our community, as the elderly do not speak French. And the young people who make up the majority speak French, but mostly go to study in English colleges and universities. All of this new law are clearly discriminatory, violating all of our rights, the Canadian Charter of Right and Freedom. And finally, one most popular French philosopher, educator of the 18th century, poet, prose writer, satirist, historian, and publicist, Voltaire wrote, "Freedom is not something you have been given. This is something that cannot be taken away from you." Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Groisberg. I hear your angst, and I remember something you said on June the 13th. You said the population from the former Soviet Union here in Montreal tends to be highly educated. Many people with scientific and engineering backgrounds, many of whom learned English as a second language at the university and part of their professional training. And most of those people communicate with their healthcare provider, because many of them now are elderly. They communicate in English, and they clearly don't qualify as historic Anglophones under the context of this law. They fear loss of services, and I think it's a very, very real fear. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us again. Ladies and gentlemen, this meeting was supposed to end at actually at 8:45, and I told our IT guys they'd be out of here by 9 at the latest. However, some people have signaled questions almost 45 minutes ago, so I'm going to take exactly the first 2 questions that were signaled. They were by Linton Garner, who has his hand up, and Perry Belendra, who sent me 2 texts during the meeting. So I'm going to ask Linton to make put forward his question or his short comment. Hi, Linton. It's been a long time.
Thank you, Marvin. I appreciate that. My concern is about the encouragement of businesses to hire Anglophones. With the menacing, overwhelming, I guess, administrative responsibilities to do everything in French, where will and how will Anglophones be hired? We have seen already that there's a difference in the levels of employment for Anglophones and Francophones in terms of their ability to get jobs in the province. We have also seen that racialized minorities are even further behind in that, in that realm. So my optimism doesn't extend to what David has said about encouraging people to stay in this province when young people are going to find out that they're not going to be able to find jobs to be able to continue their professional lives. And we don't know what that kind of level of test will be to prove that you can speak French, and what's going to be sufficient to be able to, to work in a French-speaking environment. Does that also include that you have to be culturally aware, or, is it just going to be language? I think that when we talk about the social effects that Bonivi talked about, that's going to be one of the, I think, more devastating ones, that employers will not take a chance on hiring English-speaking members of our community.
Thank you for your remarks. A lot will depend on the implementation of the bill, which is progressive over the course of the next 3 years. But your fears are very, very valid. And careful what you wish for. We live in a different economic environment. We live in an environment where online has made location actually redundant in many ways. We live in a globalized world. Those who basically tell top talent you're not wanted because you're speaking French as a second or third language risk losing that talent to online businesses just across the border, whatever. There's nothing to say that a stringent effort to implement Bill 96 won't lead to an exodus of jobs. I frankly don't know, but it's a question that needs to be asked. As well, the requirement to get hired under the law says you can't actually ask for English to be a requirement for most jobs. You have to be able to prove that job actually needs English. It's hard to believe that in a global competitive world, businesses might have to hire employees who are unilingual French, but that's the reading of the law that many people have as well. So your concerns are very, very valid, and these are concerns that we're going to have to push in front of the Quebecers. The battle may not be at the government level, it may be in public opinion. And for the last question, I'm going to ask Perry Belendra, who sent me a text, to please take the microphone and speak. Perry, we're not hearing you. I know you're still there. I see you there.
Okay, can you hear me, everybody?
Yeah, we can hear you. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Okay, we are running out of time. I got few questions here, but all related to medical practice. I'm going to read this one. It's coming from a doctor. Like small medical clinics that cater to minority populations who don't speak French or English very well. Will there be any repercussions if these clinics include a commonly spoken language in their daily practice to convey information? For example, in the voicemail, notices, their website, and emails. That is the one question.
The answer with a strict reading of the law would appear to be yes, there would be repercussions. It's like Mr. Ortona said, an English school has to, and the English school board has to function in French among the employees outside of the classroom context. Our reading for the medical sector would be that it would also apply. But again, the answer is in the implementation. The government tells us not to worry. No, you're misreading the law. This is a strict reading of the law. So the debate will go on. Mr. Balendra, we would like to come back to you on this specific question because I think it's a wonderfully valid, important question. When you talk about an immigrant community, I know that you work with many Tamil groups, and I've met persons from the Tamil community, and some of them speak English as a second language, but they speak it with some difficulty. Tamil is their language, and this is particularly true of seniors who came here with their families. I can see that this could be a huge problem. Miss Fox mentioned when she spoke that compassion should be the only metric within healthcare. Clearly, you don't want patient care to be compromised. You don't want the health of the patient to be compromised. A couple of speakers said, well, there are exceptions in law. We don't know to what level those exceptions will go. This is a work in progress. A strict reading of the bill is chilling. It really is, including for the people running this clinic. But however, the reality will be played out in how it's implemented. So we shall see. But clearly, this is something we're going to advocate for as well. There has to be accommodations and modifications. The government will find that the population will not go along with a law that is so egregiously discriminatory and causes so many real-life problems. We were disappointed when our proposal for a small amendment for a handful of rabbis didn't elicit a response. I'm sure that is going to mushroom into a bigger movement within the Jewish community. And I think from what we've heard tonight that other communities are beginning to mobilize as well. Ultimately, it won't be one or two or three communities working in isolation, but when we work all together, we're going to put all these issues in front of the government. They'll have several choices, one of which will be to engage with us. And perhaps by regulation, some of these problems will be resolved. It won't necessarily make the bill better, but at least it will attenuate it some. So I can't give you more answer than that this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for attending this call. Mesdames et messieurs, je vous remercie pour être une partie de cet appel aujourd'hui. René Brith revient à la groupe après ça. René Brith is going to come back to you. I think we heard the consensus to work together. We had offers from many groups to work with us. We appreciate that. We will come back to you with a proposal within a reasonable delay. As well as some of the documents that were referred to today, we will circulate that so that everyone will have it. I wish you all a very good evening. Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. And I will ask our IT group to terminate the call.
Thank you, Marvin.
Hi, Marvin.
Thank you, Marvin. Thank you.
Thank you, Marvin. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.